Alright guys, I wanted to show you a couple of articles that I found recently that I thought were interesting. The first is this article from the Washington Post that was published a couple days ago, and as you can see, it's called Gold is Doomed. Now, when I first saw this headline, I actually thought this was kind of more of one of those tongue-in-cheek articles that was meant to be sarcastic or ironic, or at the very least, I thought this was an article where the author would kind of hedge his bets and say, well, maybe it's doomed, maybe it's not. But you read this article, and it's just a straight up, in your face, snarky, the gold bugs were wrong and they've lost all this money, and gold is going to continue to go down. He plays it straight. He basically just points out that gold has been plummeting, which is true. You can see here on this chart, here's the peak of gold, and it's just dropped like a rock. The thing is, though, that my opinion is that most of the time when you see a business article or a finance article that's posted in the news like this, it's generally a contrary sentiment or a contrary indicator, meaning that it generally is at the point where the price has bottomed. So this article actually, if you had seen it a few days ago or a couple days ago, it was actually the #1 article in the Post for a while. And when I see something like this, it suggests to me that maybe the price of gold has bottomed, at least in the short term. And I say that because once mainstream news articles like the Washington Post are posting articles that are #1 on their website about how gold is doomed, generally that's the point where the news has been out. And if you actually look at the chart of gold, actually this is GLD, which is a gold ETF, you could see it's absolutely plummeted. You can kind of see a good head and shoulders here. Right shoulder, head, left shoulder, and now it's gone down. But if you look over the last week or so, this is a daily chart, and look at this volume. And on Friday, gold actually had a big intraday reverse. It ended up going up about 1%, um, but it's a bigger move than that because it went up a lot higher from its very bottom. So like I'm saying, long term, it seems like gold is in a decline, but at least in the short term, given that article in the Post, it suggests that maybe gold has bottomed and now might actually be a good time to take a shot on gold. But I would keep your positions very light if you were to do that. The second article that I found is from the New York Times, and this is the New York Times website. And what's interesting to me is that the Times has just recently assigned a reporter to be basically a reporter that follows the super rich. So this article is called Following the Money. Alessandra Stanley weighs in. Alessandra Stanley used to be the television critic for the Times. She's now switched jobs. I'm assuming it's a she because I thought Alessandra was a female. And now her job is her new beat, I should say, is, quote, the richest of the rich. So since late June, mid-July of this year, the Times has now assigned a reporter to follow the news of the 1%. Actually, not just the 1%. Stanley will follow the top 1% of the 1%. So this, to me, again, as a contrary indicator, would suggest that maybe we have a short-term top in the market. Once you have the New York Times assigning a reporter specifically to follow the 1% of the 1% of the rich, that suggests to me that maybe we're getting to a point where the stock market has peaked. And this story actually reminded me of something that happened back in 2007, which I'll show you here. This is an article from the Wall Street Journal. It's dated June 5th, 2007. It's written by a guy named Robert Frank. Robert Frank published a book called Richistan, and similar to the New York Times. It was about the richest of the rich. He wrote a whole book about the richest of the rich. And what's interesting about this is that if you read this first sentence, today marks the release of my book, Richistan. So I thought I'd answer two questions, etc., etc. What's with the title? What's so new about the rich getting richer? Um, Notice he says that today marks the day of my release, June 5th, 2007. That was almost to the day, the very, very top of the stock market before it declined during the Great Recession. And I'll show you here a chart. Here's the S&P 500, June 5th, 2007. That's right around here is when his book came out. A month later, the market was here, and then it fell and it came back. And this was I guess this was the top of the market right here, was in October. But really, it was like June, July, October, the market was peaking. And just as the market was peaking, comes this book, Richistan by Robert Frank, another mainstream news publication, the Wall Street Journal. So that's why this article caught my eye. If the New York Times is now specifically paying one of their reporters to focus full time on the richest of the rich, then maybe we are again nearing some sort of a top. It's a contrary indicator. When mainstream publications do something, your reaction kind of as a trader would be to do the opposite. Anyways, these are just sentiment indicators. They don't mean anything. Like I said in the last video, you really have to wait and see the evidence before making any moves. Um, but this is the chart that I showed you yesterday. This is actually a daily chart though, instead of a weekly chart. And you can see that the market has kind of been flatlining this year. It has this rounded top, and to me, that suggests that it could be due for a correction. The thing that I'm going to be looking for, especially this coming week, is on the daily chart, whether the S&P is going to break below the 200-day moving average, which is this red line. So it hasn't done it very much since 11. It's done it here, it's done it here. It did it last October, and it touched here, and it touched last week. This is all stuff we mentioned in the last video. But if the daily, if the S&P 500 price point goes below this 200-day, then that could be an indicator that we're in for some sort of a correction. So we'll wait and see what happens. You got to keep following it day by day, and then we will continue reporting as we see what happens in the news.